No. All right. Okay, good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Excellent. If you couldn't, I don't know if I could do much about it. Tech is always my biggest issue. To those of us here in person, thank you so much for being here. To those of you on Zoom, I'm hoping that you're seeing everything you're supposed to be seeing, but we are having just a couple of tech issues because it wouldn't be an event otherwise. Good morning. I am Lori Shepard. For those of you who haven't had a chance to meet me yet, it is so nice to see all of your faces here today. I am tremendously honored that you would come out to hear my reflections from Poland 80 years after liberation. For those of you who know me, which is almost everybody in this room, I got a lot of hugs this morning, you know well that I cry easily, which makes no sense for somebody who chose Holocaust education as their profession. So as I embarked on this journey, I want you to know that I started crying on the plane from Denver to Frankfurt. We hadn't even left US airspace yet. And I'm reading my Rick Steves. Who told me to get Rick Steves? You did. I'm reading my Rick Steves book on Warsaw, Krakow, and Gdansk. And I read this line. I'm going to cry. In the early 1600s, an estimated 80% of all Jews lived in Poland. At that time, it was the largest country in Europe. Between the two world wars, Jewish culture flourished here. Now, why does such a simple statement move me to tears and make the people around me on the airplane a little nervous? Because I have been focusing so much on this trip, which was the trip of a lifetime for somebody like me. And I have been focusing so much on the Holocaust education and all of the things about the Holocaust that I was going to see. I was going to see Auschwitz and Majdanek and all of these amazing places. And it hit me like a ton of bricks, the stark reality of all that I wasn't going to see. And all that has been lost, completely lost. And so it was a very humbling way for me to begin this journey, thinking I need to keep my eyes on not just what I'm going to see, but what we're not going to see. Okay, really? I joke about technology, but come on. Okay. So what was this journey meant to be? This trip was organized by the Association of Holocaust Organizations. And it was meant to be a trip for Holocaust educators and Holocaust leaders to be a part of the commemoration of the 80th anniversary of the Liberation of Auschwitz. Now, I have been lucky enough to be a member of the Association of Holocaust Organizations from literally my first day in Holocaust education. When I started at El Paso Holocaust Museum and Study Center many years ago, the second week of my job, I spent it in Austin at an Association of Holocaust Organizations conference. And that group has been such an important part of all that I have done since. Let me give you just a little background on AHO so you recognize why this was so exciting for us. AHO started in 1985. They are an organization made, they are a network of organizations made up of organizations and individuals who focus on the advancement of Holocaust education, remembrance, and research. Every year, they host two conferences, one in June and one in January, and they bring all of us together. There's a couple of those wayward souls here with us today. They bring all of us together so that we can learn with and for each other. And this year, I'm so grateful that the board of AHO recognized that the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz would be just a major historical milestone, but also such an important thing for all of us to be a part of, for AHO members. And they got none other than Michael Birnbaum to lead it. Now, for those of you who've never heard the name Michael Birnbaum, please let me tell you why this was such a big deal for all of us on the trip. Michael is one of the foremost scholars on Holocaust memory and education. When people say he wrote the book on this topic, he actually wrote 24. of them. And in fact, the very first Holocaust book that anyone ever gave me to read was written by Michael Birnbaum. It was The World Must Know. He has edited books. He has been a part of films. He is currently the director of the Ziggy Ziering Institute, exploring the ethical and religious implications of the Holocaust, and a distinguished professor of Jewish studies at the American Jewish College, American Jewish University. And in addition to those 24 books and those movies that I just mentioned, he's also the executive editor of the Encyclopedia Judaica. And he was the project director overseeing the creation of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. He was the first director in its research institute, and he later served as president and CEO of the Survivors of the Shoah Visual History Foundation, which took the testimony of 52,000 Holocaust survivors in 32 languages from 57 different countries. He has developed and curated museums in the United States, in Mexico, in North Macedonia, and in Poland. And as excited as I was, here, this is Michael. This is Michael with his friend, Jan Karski. And I don't say that jokingly. This was a very good friend of his. So when Michael is telling us all of the things that I'll never, he will forget, as they say, he will forget more than I will ever know. He does it from such a place of personal knowledge. And it was such an honor to be on this trip. As much as it was an honor to be on the trip with Michael, it was an honor to be with those 35 people up there in that picture. These are all Holocaust educators and leaders from around the country, and we learned so much from each other. Now, this trip was small. That's about the whole of us. I think one or two people are off to the side. I might have cropped them out. But that is the most of us. This trip was specifically curated for us. So I'm going to show you our itinerary. And I'm going to tell you that this is only a very small portion of our itinerary. This was an extremely aggressive itinerary. Not words you usually use, but this was an extremely aggressive itinerary. At one point while we were on the trip, someone groaned about the pace of our trip. And Michael very gently, if you knew Michael, you would know he didn't do this gently. He very gently said, "You're not students, and I'm not here to coddle you. You are going to keep up." And just so you know, Michael's 79. And one of the mornings when I was so exhausted, I heard him say to someone, "Well, I ran this morning." And I thought, of course he did. So you don't say much when it's Michael. But we did do so much. We did more in those 6 days than I felt as I was leaving that I deserved a master's certificate in Holocaust education. I'm going to let him know I need that from Michael over this trip. It was amazing. So what I'm going to try to do over the next hour, and I'm going to be honest, it's going to be really hard to do, is I'm just going to try to give you little bits of what our trip looked like and the things that really struck me on the trip. And this is still very hard for me because I don't think I'm done processing. And I may not be done processing this trip for a very, very long time. So the first day, we were in Warsaw. When we were in Warsaw, well, first of all, I have to tell you, this was my first trip to Poland, and I had no idea that I was going to love Poland the way that I did. I knew it was going to be an amazing trip. I had no idea I was going to fall in love with Poland. I might have texted my wife at some point on the trip and said, "You're Polish. Can you check out Right of Return?" But that's a different story entirely. As I was going through Warsaw, what struck me was this mix of centuries-old Jewish history and Holocaust memory mixed with today's Poland. I said when I first got there, "Wow, it is European fashion and US fast food." And that was my take from our hotel room. And then as we would go through the trip, we saw so many amazing things. We started our morning over at the Jewish Heritage Institute, a place that I'll be honest with you, that if I went to Poland on my own, I probably would think, "Oh, that's interesting, but I'm not going to go there." And it would be a huge mistake because we walk in and Michael is giving us a dissertation as he did. So you'll hear me say this several times on the trip, we wore receivers and Michael wore a microphone. He never took the microphone off or turned it off twice when he went to the lavatory. And we just pulled our little plug out. So he would continually on the bus and everywhere that we were give us these dissertations. And he's giving us this amazing dissertation about the history of the building that the Jewish Heritage Institute is in. And it's in a building that had been a synagogue and they had attempted to burn it down. In fact, you could still see the burn marks on the floor. And as we walked up the stairs, this beautiful staircase, this is what we were looking at, that milk can. And for those of you who don't know what that milk can is, it is one of 2 milk cans that contain the archives of the Ringelblum archives or the Oneg Shabbat archives. This was an underground archive that was created by Dr. Emanuel Ringelblum, and his stated purpose, his whole reason for doing it, was he knew that they weren't going to survive the Warsaw Ghetto. And he wanted to be sure that there was an accurate documentation of the realities under Nazi occupation. He enlisted people from all different professions, all different lifestyles, religions, ideological spectrums, children, adults, and they all created whatever was the right thing for them to create for this. Some of them wrote their last will and testaments. Some made art. Some literally put maps of the ghetto and what it looked like. So it was really this overarching archive of everything that was happening. They buried these 2 milk cans along with 3 other containers. They hid them, knowing they were going into the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. So many of them knew they wouldn't be there. So to walk up the stairs and have that at the top of the stairs, something that I've learned so much about, to have that be sitting there, it literally takes your breath. And again, this is probably, the Jewish Institute is probably not somewhere, if I was in Poland on my own, that I would have visited. And to have that happen was just a snapshot into how amazing Poland is. You also see in these pictures, there's Michael, we're at what's left of the Warsaw Ghetto wall. I think most people who go think they're going to see the Warsaw Ghetto. It's not there. This is what you see. The Poland Museum, that was something that I wanted to spend time at. I was so excited to be there. And it was probably the thing that I was like, I can't right now with this because I was so overwhelmed from the other things that I had seen. It's an amazing museum of Jewish history in Warsaw. And then the Jewish cemetery. So to walk in that Jewish cemetery, which connects to the Catholic cemetery, is amazing. And he pointed out so many important headstones, so many important histories. And the one thing I kept thinking about, now, for those of you who don't know this, the survivors are on our front row here today. But one thing that I kept thinking about was Wanda Woloski. I kept thinking about how she and her mom left the ghetto the day before the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. And they were hidden in that Catholic cemetery for the remainder of the war. That's where they hid. So while I'm supposed to be paying attention, and I am, to these others, all I can think about is here. All I can think about is Wanda back here. Warsaw was amazing. The next day, we were on a bus. So everything that we did was on a bus. We would check into the hotel for one night. The next morning, we would check out with our suitcases, put it underneath the bus, get on the bus, and go somewhere else. We got very intimately involved with this bus. Wait, I'm going to go back to Warsaw for 1 minute because I almost forgot to tell you one of the most important things. So we had dinner that night. With the head rabbi, the chief rabbi of Poland. And he gave us some opening remarks, very welcoming remarks. One of the stories that he told was amazing to me. It was that in 2012, there was a census and 7,000 people in Poland identified as Jewish. Last year, they did a census and 18,000 people in Poland identified as Jewish. The rabbi was very quick to tell us there's been little to no immigration and very few conversions. It is the difference in feeling safe to say you are Jewish between 2012 and this past year. And that is huge. So I know we can become very overwhelmed by the state of the world, by the state of our societies, but that was amazing to learn. It was really powerful. So the next day we're in Krakow, and we are on an amazing tour of the Jewish Quarter, the old synagogue. We went to the underground Krakow Museum. You see, we went to the Rima Synagogue and Cemetery. We went to the Ghetto Heroes Memorial. Oh my gosh, we did so many things that I literally can't explain them all. One of the biggest parts of our day, though, was walking around the Jewish Quarter, and that's along something called the Jewish Heritage Route. And here we saw pieces of Holocaust history. We saw which it really was the Jewish Quarter, but it's also the scene from Schindler's List where they're throwing luggage, suitcase, all their belongings down the stairs, and you see a small child hiding under the stairs. So we saw things like that, and that wasn't the part that really got me. While we were picking up pierogies, because we needed a plate of pierogies, we happened to walk over to a vendor, and this is my colleague who is looking at Holocaust memorabilia, but it is Nazi memorabilia. So you could buy Nazi memorabilia in that Jewish Quarter right there. And I said, I want to buy everything so I can destroy it. And they said, I don't think there's room in your suitcase. We've seen you buying books already. So I didn't come home with any of it. But it was tempting because it was horrifying. You can't see what she's looking at there, but they're postcards from Hitler. But the thing that struck me the most in Krakow is something that you might walk right past and never even notice. It's this picture, this door frame. That door frame is missing something. It is. And what struck me was how many of those we saw. And so at some point, Michael said to us, you might be offended that the mezuzah is gone, but actually it's the Gentiles that now own that business or now live in that house. It's their way of honoring who came before. So they intentionally in Krakow don't replace those, and they don't spackle that and paint over it. They leave that missing. And Michael's quote for that touched me. Sometimes the absence of presence is the greatest presence of all. And it was a very deep understanding that the people who live there now, that the people who inhabit those spaces now, they see all that was lost, and they continue to honor all that was lost. That night, we joined Ambassador Lauder for a gala dinner with survivors and their families. And while it was lovely, I don't have pictures of it because it hardly compared to all that we had just seen that day. It was just so much that day. The next day, we were at Auschwitz. In the morning, we had a few stops along the way because, like I said earlier, Michael didn't waste a moment of our time. We stopped along the way at a house where a family had recognized that there was a lot of Holocaust memorabilia in the landfill. So this family just started collecting it. And now they have a whole collection, and they'll loan it out. But they just couldn't bear for it to be in the landfill and for it to be lost. That was a very surreal moment of thinking about being in a landfill some 30 years ago and suddenly seeing Holocaust memorabilia. And this wasn't Holocaust memorabilia that had been at the camps. This was things that had belonged to people or had been on someone's property, and they said, oh, I'm going to throw this away. Staggering. That night, we went to the 80th anniversary of the commemoration of Auschwitz, which is while we were there. At the commemoration, 3,200 of us had the honor of joining just 49 Holocaust survivors.
3,200.
There was 3,200 people in that room. It's the biggest tent in Europe, they told us. You can see from this picture that they tent physically over the building, the railroad tracks, and the rail car. So the 3,200 of us are there with these 49 survivors and a few dignitaries. That's King Charles right there. The part that mattered the most to us was that none of those dignitaries spoke. No politicians spoke. No one spoke but some intros and the survivors, which is exactly how the 80th anniversary should be. It was wonderful and awful to hear from them. So we heard 4 amazing stories, and then it was time to go, which was surreal in itself too. The next day, we were back on tour with Michael. The next day was Auschwitz for us. You know, as I was trying to think about what I was going to share with you, and I was going through this myriad of pictures, it's impossible to say, these are the things I'm going to share with you from Auschwitz. It's so difficult, so hard to bring forward just one thing. So what I will tell you is a couple of things that struck me from the day. The first is how lucky we were. We traveled with Michael Birnbaum. Well, the first thing is you have to be very patient because everyone stops to talk to Michael because everyone knows Michael Birnbaum. The second is you get an unprecedented behind the scenes look. So we were traveling with Michael and also a Polish guy named Peter, and he worked at Auschwitz. So between the two of them, we saw a barracks that no one else has access to that is kept in its original form. It had been Hungarian Jews. We saw an art exhibit, an art gallery that very few people have access to of art from prisoners. The part about this art is that some of it was art that they made clandestine, and some of it was art that they were forced to make for the offices and the homes of the Nazi officers. Art is such an expression of our humanity and of our freedom. So to see this combination of those things was a very powerful way to understand the humanity. Like I said, it's so hard to pick one thing. You know, the book of names, when you go in and you see the book of names and it just goes down and down and down, and you know that all of those names are not even close to all of the names. The shoes, the death wall outside of block 11, the wall of pictures of the prisoners. So most people don't know this, but originally they didn't do the tattoos. They actually took pictures of all the prisoners until it became too expensive and too time consuming. And so they switched to tattooing everyone to keep track. So many of those spaces take your breath. I didn't include this picture. I should have. There's a stairwell in one of the camp buildings, and it's been worn, so worn away. And this isn't a stairwell that's used. This was one of the ones that was hidden away. And the wear marks, they were put there by humans. They were put there over time, and that was powerful to understand, to think about. There were so many things that struck me that probably weren't what would strike someone else. The noise of our footsteps on the gravel. It played in my ears in a way that I hadn't expected, because all I could think about, and it was freezing that day, all I could think about was us all bundled up in our snow boots and our comfy shoes. And all I could think about was the people who tread those same walkways barefoot or in those clogs. And it for some reason, that noise really stayed with me. It will stay with me the rest of my life. The other thing that stayed with me was, as you see in that picture off in the distance, all those 2-story buildings. Almost none of those buildings were 2-story when they were built. So when you walk past them, you can see the differential in the brick from where it was 1-story when they started, and later they made it 2-story because the Nazis were picking up their slave labor and they needed more space. Those are probably not the things that Michael wanted me to take away, but those are the things that struck with me. And then another is as we walked into one of those buildings, you know how we put a date on the front of a building? We have it on the front of this one, next door. This building that I walked into said 1938. And I thought, wow, that was built in 1938. The synagogue where my office is, where I sit every day, was built in 1910. Jews were establishing a new religious life in southern Arizona more than 25 years before the first brick was placed in Auschwitz. And it was not lost on me that most all of those pioneering Jews who came here to southern Arizona came from Germany and Poland and other places around Eastern Europe. Not the things that you expect are going to stick with you, but you can't know. The next day, we went to Auschwitz to Birkenau. As we continued our tour that day, we saw the ruins of the worst of the worst. Here are the crematoriums and rubble. Here are what the Nazis tried to destroy. What they tried to say didn't happen, what they tried to make not happen. We walked 30,000 steps that day. I know because I have a stepwatch. It was really cold, and not one of us complained. At one point, we walked into an area that if some of you have been, you'll know it. It's called the Old White House. And its frame is there at this bottom. And we were looking off into the distance at this lovely stand of trees. It's a little forest of evergreens. And there were deer playing. And you can see it had been raining that morning, but the sky was gorgeous. And a member of our group stopped short and she started to tear up. And then she said, I know this stand of trees. I know this stand of trees. I know the picture that was taken here. And all of us that do this work immediately recognized it as well. This iconic picture was taken here of women and children who had just arrived on a transport. They'd been sent to that stand of trees to wait. What they were waiting for, they didn't know yet. It was such a powerful moment for all of us to remember that the humanity of where we were walking is just not lost. So we were completely wiped after that. I think usually we would get back on the bus, there would be all this chatter on our bus ride to Lublin that night. I don't think any of us said much of anything. And so we went to Lublin and we hastily ate dinner. We went to bed because the next morning we started again. The next morning we were at Majdanek. Now, this day was probably our longest. We started our morning at Majdanek, where we toured one of the most preserved concentration camps. For me, Majdanek was probably the most personally emotional. And I'm just going to tell you right now, I'm not going to get through this part without crying. Not only are the buildings well preserved, but you can see clearly the destruction of life in this camp. This camp has a huge mausoleum of ashes. It was built to hold more than 15 separate piles of victims' ashes that were found on the site. This site wasn't immediately turned into a Holocaust memorial. In fact, it was stuck, trapped behind Soviet control for quite a while. And so I want to tell you a story about why this camp was so hard for me to see in person. When I first started in El Paso, at El Paso Holocaust Museum and Study Center, our founder, Henry, like most survivors, was tenacious. And he went with a cousin to Majdanek. He went to Majdanek before it was a museum, before it was a state-sponsored site. It was surrounded by a fence, and he and his cousin liberated that fence with wire cutters and went inside. And while Henry was there, he he took some ashes and some bullet casings that he found on the ground. He took a can, an empty canister of Zyklon B, and he took a shower head. As I was touring Majdanek, there was a moment where Michael is telling us about the process of intake in Majdanek. And between what I know of Henry's family, I'm a little overwhelmed. So I take out my earplug and I step into the next room. And as I step into the next room, I'm looking up at those shower heads. And I know those shower heads well because one of them is on display at the El Paso Holocaust Museum and Study Center and has been for more than 30 years. And I start crying and I look over to my left and there's a hole. There's an empty spot where he took that shower head from. Now, before you think awful of us at El Paso Holocaust Museum and Study Center, as soon as Henry passed away, we didn't do this while he was alive. We called Majdanek and we said, we actually have some artifacts that a survivor took before it was a museum, and we want to work on getting those back to Majdanek. And the director of the museum said, have you displayed that they're from Majdanek? And we said, yes, of course. And he said, then you keep them there. So before you think that we as another museum would allow that, we did engage and try to do what was right. It was a moment of having Henry with me, and someone who came because I was crying, 2 or 3 of my colleagues came and said, are you okay? And so I told one of them the story, and she said, why would anyone take something from Majdanek? And I said, because they took everything from him here. That was his way of taking something back. So while Majdanek, and actually I'll talk about this in a moment, doesn't have a lot of first-hand testimony there, it was a very personal place for me to be. And I did call Jamie Flores, who is the executive director, Jamie Williams now, of El Paso Holocaust Museum, and I said, I'm going to tell this story. Are you okay with it? And she said, yes, but Henry would be really mad at you. He wouldn't. He loved when we talked about him. So Majdanek was very hard for me because of the humanity that you take in there. And again, because it got sort of locked down behind the curtain, it actually, interestingly enough, got preserved in a way that some of the other spaces didn't. We got back on the bus. We headed to Belgique. Belgique is one of the sites that Michael Berenbaum actually led the production of the project team for. It is an amazing site that was completely destroyed. And so they literally built this memorial back from nothing. As you know, when the Nazis were fleeing, they tried to destroy much of what would have been evidence behind them. So at Belgique, this was a space where they had to decide, how do you possibly memorialize this in this space? They brought in, for lack of a better word, this is what Michael said, slag. All of that is just slag rock and pieces of metal and steel. And they literally made the entire space of the camp that wasted earth, to show you what that wasted earth, when you stand on that site, that picture doesn't do it justice, how large it is. And just to remind you, something I didn't say at Auschwitz is that Michael would say mourner's cottage at the spaces we were at. And we needed that. We all needed that. Here he is offering that at Belgique, and to know that he created that space and to have him offer that there was extremely powerful. One of the hard things about Belgique for me is that there were only 2 survivors from that camp. Only 2. And they only have recorded testimony from 1. And it's one of the hardest testimonies I've ever listened to in my life. during the testimony, the reason there were two survivors is they were the ones putting the bodies into the crematoriums. And he said the day he stopped feeling was the day he heard a small child say, "Mommy, wasn't I good?" And he decided the only way he could survive after that was to just never feel again. Those stories from those survivors, they're what move us. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Next, we got on a bus for 3 hours. We rode on a bus for 3 hours to go to Sobibor. It's not near anything else. And we had to vote whether we were willing to ride 3 hours one way to go to Sobibor. It wasn't going to be open when we got there, and we could only stay for 30 minutes. And all of us, being who we were, we voted that it was worth a 6-hour drive to go to Sobibor. And I'm not sorry. We spent the least amount of time at Sobibor, and we all agreed that it was the most amazing of all of the modern museums. That picture in the middle is artifacts from Sobibor, and it is an artifact case that runs up the center of the museum, and then everything circles around it. But what Sobibor did that I found other museums didn't do is they were able to blend not only the memorial of the site with its physical history, but they were also able to bring in survivor testimony. You see that amazing survivor wall? I took a picture just so Ori and I can work on that. They were able to bring in survivor testimony and then to create a place of deeply engaging education. It is what all Holocaust museums should be, in my very humble opinion. Because Sobibor did such an amazing job of blending the memorial site with education, it caused me to have a bit of an epiphany of sorts. I think that might be you, Miss Chris. Okay. Well, we'll just ignore it. They'll hang up. After visiting so many sites in such a few days, I realized that there were deep divides in how Poland, and I guess I should say how Europe does, what their approach to Holocaust education and memorial is versus what we do here in the United States. I realized that our approach to Holocaust education and memory in the United States is first person. Everything that we do here is first person, but everything that they do there is what I'm calling first place narrative. We don't have sites. I can't say Poland does everything with first place narrative. They literally have items you can take from a landfill. They have pieces of history that we will never have here in the United States. They are able to bring those things forward in a way that we can't. And I think that is powerful for Poland and for Eastern Europe. And that's exactly how they should be approaching Holocaust education. We don't have that here in the United States. What we have here is first person narrative. What we have here is intimate histories. We have and we hold dear the stories of our local Holocaust survivors. We have the survivors who immigrated and then made this place their home. And they brought, just like they had few heirlooms with them, they brought what they had with them. What we do here with courageous Holocaust survivors who penned their memoirs, who recorded their testimonies, and to continue to show up for school tours and look students in the eye and say, "You're my witness now." That is something so powerful and so different than what they have in Europe and what they have in Poland. I actually saw very few survivor testimonies when I was in Poland, and it didn't strike me until I was at Sobibor and saw testimonies, how few testimonies I had seen. And I realized that I wouldn't trade what we do here for anything, because how we tell this story here is so very powerful and so meaningful. Now, what that means is that Holocaust education today is changing, and what Holocaust education is going to look like in the future is going to change. Because whether we like it or not, we're going to say goodbye to that generation at some point. Not anytime soon, but at some point. And so it makes me ask myself in this work, what's Holocaust education going to look like? Is it going to be relevant? Are we going to be able to ensure that your legacies are not lost? How are we going to keep using the Holocaust as a teaching tool? And so when I think about it, I think back, because we were there for the 80th anniversary, I think back to how Holocaust education started in the United States, not in Europe, but here in the United States. I think back to, we didn't have Holocaust education here in the United States until, well, in the 1960s, a group of Jewish students started saying, we need to have Holocaust education, and it's not here. But it took until the 1980s until it would start showing up in our classrooms. And even then, it wasn't curriculums. It was tidbits. It was a paragraph in a book. It wasn't a lesson. And so it has taken this time for this to evolve to where we are now. So, and let me tell you where we are now. Currently, there are 26 states that in some way say how we're going to teach the Holocaust and other genocides. There are only 17 states that actually mandate that it must be taught. So you can do the math. I'm not sure as of today how many states we have. We may have 51. But I do know that that's not enough states. That's not enough. Less than half is not okay. It's not enough. So I mean, making teaching the Holocaust relevant in 2025, and there are big changes happening right now. I mean, I say tongue in cheek, right? But what's happening right now with our education department? That's scary, because it's going to change what happens with Holocaust education. Now, for me, I would argue that teaching the Holocaust is still as relevant today as it was when it first got started in the 1970s and 1980s. And I would actually argue that it's more relevant. And you might think that I'm going to cite October 7th as the reason for that relevancy, and you'd be right. There's been a huge increase in the reporting of anti-Semitic acts and behaviors since Hamas attacked Israel in October of 2023. But it isn't just anti-Semitism. It's anti-Semitism and so much more. For those of you who have joined us for our Lakin Lecture series on anti-Semitism, you know that this year our series is Anti-Semitism and. We look at anti-Semitism and democracy. We look at anti-Semitism and building bridges across communities. Our next one coming up is anti-Semitism and race. This isn't enough that we just look at anti-Semitism. Holocaust education is fighting anti-Semitism at its core, and so much more. So what we know is we have work to do, because teaching the Holocaust right isn't just giving facts and figures. It isn't that timeline on that wall back there. In fact, I wouldn't even care if that timeline wasn't there, because that's not what's going to drive things home for students. Teaching the Holocaust is helping them learn how to use the lessons of the Holocaust in their own critical thinking. Because without critical thinking, we're in big trouble. And right now, some adults are struggling with it, as well as students. We have to be focusing on how to teach these students the lessons of the Holocaust so that they can think critically. They're not just thinking critically about what happened in the history. They are thinking about, what did individuals do? What did bystanders do? What did upstanders do? This is the level of thinking that we have got to be helping students come to. And I know this isn't a curriculum item, but we have to use the Holocaust to teach empathy. They're not going to learn empathy on TikTok. I say that, I've never actually been on TikTok. But learning the from the experiences of victims. Truly, hearing from Sydney, hearing from Andrew, hearing from our survivors is how they're learning empathy. It's how they're learning to uphold human rights. It's how they're learning that, yes, this happened to the Jews, and yes, this can happen to another group of people, and yes, it can happen to the Jews again. This empathy is really important. It's very valuable, and we can't turn away from it. And then the last thing that we're fighting with this education is anti-Semitism and other forms of identity-based hate. And there's just one way to do that. And that is telling people this is what happens when you look away. So I think all the time, when I started in Holocaust education, well, my first day or so, I thought, oh boy, Jamie gave me 9 books to read, and I think I've made a mistake. And then I met Henry Kellum. And then I met my first survivor. And then I met the second and the third, and so on and so on. And they changed my life. They changed how I saw things. And I remember thinking at the time, well, we'll always have the survivors to tell this story. And then slowly over time, I started going to more liberator funerals than I wanted to go to, and more survivor services than I wanted to go to. And it started to become apparent that at some point, those who we hold so dear won't be here to give that first person narrative anymore. And so we have to change some things. And AI is not the way we're going to do it. We have to change some things. We have to get second and third generation comfortable telling their family's legacy, telling their story. It's their family story. We have to get second and third generation in a place where this story goes on through them. We have to use technology, though those of you who are on Zoom probably know how much I hate technology. We have to use it. It doesn't mean we have to use the holograms or any of those things that I actually think are a little overdone, but it means we have to use those videos. I have no less than 4 videos of you, Sydney, and it's wonderful, and it's a gift that we have those, and it's so useful. And so that technology, and we're about to do a recording with Sydney in a couple of weeks, and the other survivors, where people can push a QR code and they can see them standing in front of them. Don't ask me how this technology works. I won't know even when it's here. We have to be able to use those technologies to keep doing this work and to keep doing that first person narrative. Those intimate histories are so important. And another way that we are doing this right now is, and you're going to think that I'm just stuck on the Lakins, but the Lakin family has also started an endowed chair of Holocaust studies at the University of Arizona. Ladies and gentlemen, that is huge, because it means that this isn't just left to those of us in this room, because I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but we're not taking that median age down very far. There's not a lot of young people in this room. There's a 19-year-old in the back. I know, because it's my kiddo. There's not a lot of young people in these spaces. And so this endowed chair, Dr. Leonard Hammer, this is going to give us an opportunity to start working with younger teachers, to start working with younger people, to recognize how important this work is and how we have to continue this work. So I'm over the moon about working with Dr. Hammer. And then here at the museum, we're going to keep providing those educational opportunities for the teachers. We're going to keep teaching the teachers, because the teachers need this too. A lot of them come into this and say, I don't know what I'm doing. So we're going to be giving them the curriculums that they need. We're going to be taking survivors out to them. Andrew went out last week to 2 schools. We're going to be making sure that they have the resources that they need, not just to teach those facts and figures and dates on a timeline, but to actually help the students learn the critical thinking that has to come from Holocaust education. Those are the things that we're able to do in this space. And I know you would think that that's not what I came away with from a trip to Poland, but that's exactly what I came away with from a trip to Poland. Is 80 years from now, this work continues. it continues exactly the same and not the least bit the same as it does today. Okay, now I'm going to do that thing that scares me. I'm going to answer questions. Okay, so I'm going to, hey, Chat, will you help me out here? So Chat is going to come to you with a microphone so we can be sure that everybody can hear. And I'm going to repeat the question to you. Now, here's the thing. If you don't ask a question, Chat will arm wrestle you for the microphone. So we're not making comment, we're asking question. Hello. Will you put it to your mouth?
I would like to know what the citizens of Poland think about the establishment of these memorials. How do they think about Jews? I saw the movie Show Up, and there was a man who seemed to think Hitler had the right idea. What do these people think now at the present time?
So the question was, what do the people in Poland think at the present time about all of these memorials, about all of the things that are happening? They think a lot like we do here in the United States. It's a very diverse group of people. It's a very diverse group of thought. Were there some people in Poland who were complicit? Yes, they were absolutely complicit, and a lot of anti-Semitism in Poland then and now. But I think the rabbi's anecdote to us about how many people in 2012 were willing to share that they were Jewish versus how many people who are willing to share now was telling in that answer that people feel very safe there. People feel that they can share who they are there. There were a couple of weird moments for me. So let me see if I can scroll back a little bit and show you the slide from. So on that bottom corner, that's actually a memorial from Plaszow. And Plaszow concentration camp is well, you know it from Schindler's List. We walked up the street there, and so here there's 30 of us trudging up the street with Michael at the helm, and there were people out gardening, and they said hi, hello, welcome, not in English, but they welcomed us. But then as we got into the park there for Plaszow, and note that I use the word park, it's a park. People were walking their dogs. People were picnicking, even though it was freezing. And there was maybe a father and a son flying a little airplane. It was an interesting juxtaposition because so much of what happened in Poland, it didn't happen out in the middle of nowhere. It happened right in these areas. And so when you're in that park and you're looking at the city around you, and we're literally walking up through a neighborhood, they have no choice but to reckon with this history because it's before them. And let me go back forward. I think I have a picture of Majdanek. I don't. In Majdanek, when you're standing in Majdanek, you're literally looking. When you're standing in Majdanek, it strikes you how close all of the houses are. And that was how close they were then, and it's how close they are now. So I guess my answer to you is they have no choice in Poland but to reckon with this history. And they know that they are a part of that history, and that some are complacent, and that some were upstanders, and that some were bystanders. And I would say that there is definitely anti-Semitism there, but I haven't found a place where there isn't yet. So. Wait, Chet went back to the back.
The only comment I had was there's a movie called Real Pain, and it's filmed in Poland, and they go to they're going on tour.
I watched it on the plane. Yes.
Yeah. So that's a really good awareness of how close they were to the concentration camp that they went and visited, and then they showed. And so Jesse Eisenberg, just another little comment, who
at least she's warning us. There's no question.
Right, totally, yeah. So what was interesting is that they filmed it there at the concentration camp, and they had to get mission that took them probably another year to just get them to know that they were going to be respectful. But it's a really stark awareness of where they were. And they filmed it all in Poland, where they were in the city, and then where the concentration camp was.
Yes, I think, one of the things we always hear in Holocaust education is, and it's BS, is we always hear people saying, we didn't know what was happening. And Steve has a question. And it's complete rubbish. There's no way. And when you stand in those spots and you feel how close you are, you can see and sense that there's no way you didn't know what was happening. It's just impossible.
Laura, you said that you fell in love with Poland and you love Poland and you wish you can have dual citizenship. What did you love about Poland? Took me years to go to Poland. I'm not going to go again.
Well, she said, okay, let me repeat. So she said, Laura, you said that you fell in love with Poland and that you would even get dual citizenship for Poland. It took me years to go to Poland and I'll never go again. And I'm summarizing. And so for me, what I loved about Poland was, first of all, the Jewish history, the depth of the history there, but it's also a wider history for me. I obviously am somebody who cares deeply about history and about getting history right and understanding true history, not revisionist history. And so history for me is very powerful. And Poland has very deep historical roots, not just in Jewish culture, but in so many places that I could probably go and spend a month just dragging my family on history tours. There were also some potato chips that had paprika on them that I particularly liked. So I mean, the pierogies, yes, but I can get pretty good pierogies at home. So, but no, there were so many things about Poland that just the history, the depth of the history was very powerful for me.
But my history in Poland, which is what you show. I'm not talking about what they did in 1500 or 1600. That's the issue. You don't have to answer.
Okay, so I do understand. For you, it's your personal history. And so it comes at a different cost and it comes at a different feeling. For me, it's learning about the history from the 1600s all the way through. And so I could definitely see where you would say you would never go back to Poland. And I would, of course, respect that. But for me, I do think that there's a powerful history yet to be reclaimed from Poland. Yes. Wait, 1 second, Mitch.
Lori, you indicated the rabbi's statement of the increase of Jews recognizing or admitting their heritage in Poland. And then at the same time, I remembered back a conversation that you and I have had about how people here in Tucson are taking their mezuzahs off the front of their house because they don't want, they're afraid to show that. What does that become our goal or what we need to do here in our education to help our own neighbors?
Well, Steve, I think that's probably part of why those door facings, those I think that's probably why they affected me. Probably other people on my trip would be like, really, that's what you talked about? Sure. Sorry, let me repeat that question. Steve is asking about the part where the absence is the presence, where the mezuzahs have not been covered over in Poland, but he was mentioning a conversation that he and I had where we talked about particularly one lady here in Tucson where she felt so threatened by all the news of anti-Semitism that she needed to take her own mezuzah off of her front door. Because she said, And I said, honey, I know you, and everyone in this community knows you, and everyone knows you're Jewish. And she said, yes, but the Amazon driver dropping a package off across the street doesn't know that. And the plumber who's coming to my neighbor's house doesn't know that. And I don't want other people to know that. And so Steve is asking me from that conversation, what do we do here in that same way? And it's a lot of things that we do here, Steve. One is that we don't give in to what we're hearing nationally, because locally we have an amazing community here in Southern Arizona. And while the numbers for anti-Semitism have gone up hugely in other places, they haven't here in Southern Arizona. We have a wonderfully welcoming community, and we need to keep building bridges across those communities to keep that here. We need to keep doing things together, not separate, not siloed, and we need to keep talking about not anti-Semitism. We can talk about anti-Semitism, but we need to keep talking about how we fight anti-Semitism. What are the ways we come together to make it better? And what are the ways we come together to use Jewish values to fight for others? And I think those are the things that we do here so beautifully. Did that answer your question, Steve? Okay.
Hi, Lori.
I
I was wondering, other than King Charles, were there any other world leaders there? And if not, did any world leaders send comments or acknowledgements or anything from the United States?
That's what you're really asking, Mitch. Mitch just asked me, besides King Charles, who were the other world leaders who were in the room? And so there was actually a lot of royalty. Some countries that I didn't even know had royalty sent royalty. Several of us on the bus on the way over were looking at the thing saying, really, they have a king? I didn't know. But there was a lot of, mostly it was Eastern European folks. President Zelensky was there. President Zelensky was there, and he and King Charles actually had a moment while they were lighting the candles together. The United States, I will tell you, did not put together a delegation until the day before and send them. And those of us who were on the trip were extremely disheartened by the administration's decision to treat this so blasé. And I do believe that Vice President Vance just went to Dachau a couple of days ago on his trip over for a summit. And I do feel like that was in an attempt to make up for the fact that we should have had higher ranking members of our current administration there, and we did not. And those of us in the administration and from the US were extremely disappointed. No.
Lori, that slide that you showed with your colleague, looking at the Nazi memorabilia souvenirs being sold on the street, is it correct that in Germany that type of thing is prohibited? And if I'm correct about that, it would seem that Poland would really shut it down.
Okay, so the question was about the picture of Suzanne looking at Nazi memorabilia. Let me go back to her. I bet she would love to know I use this picture of her. So no, Poland actually has not shut it down. And let me tell you why. So in Germany, there are laws. There are rules. You cannot just talk about certain things. In Poland, they will make it very clear to you, and they actually have different laws. You cannot call anything about the Holocaust Polish. Nothing upsets a Pole more than for you to say the Polish concentration camps, because they were Nazi concentration camps in Poland. And so they don't have the same laws. And what they see when you're selling, and by the way, I should tell you that next to this Nazi memorabilia she's looking at, they also had stamps from the Warsaw Ghetto. So I guess the vendor at this table was an equal opportunity salesman. And I did ask him in extremely horrible broken Polish if those were real or reproductions. And he said both. We have real and we have reproductions. And I said, can you tell me which are which? And he said no. So, but Poland doesn't have that same sense. They have a sense that what happened was not something they did or something they're responsible for. It was very much the Nazis. And so they don't have those same laws in place as what you referenced from Germany. Yes, Michael, 1 second.
Wife, Marcia, and I were in Poland in 2018, independently. We were primarily there to go look at the towns, town, city, and villages from which our family came. They left before the Holocaust. And we met a lot of Poles. As a matter of fact, a gentleman who is second in charge of the Krakow Jewish Museum is not Jewish. He became very fascinated by Judaism. But my point is that in our conversations, we found a lot of people recognizing Jewish heritage. I don't know where your statistics came from, and more of them are being aware of that and want to investigate it further. So I think there's more than 18,000.
Okay, Michael didn't ask a question, but his comment was he feels that while his time in Poland, he met a lot of people who were learning their Polish, a lot of Poles who were learning their Jewish heritage. And Michael, I think that is the case, but the rabbi was quick to say, this is not conversions, this is not people coming back, this is people who have always been Jewish who so now feel safe. They now feel safe enough to say that they're Jewish. And by the way, I know lots of non-Jews who run Jewish museums and do a fabulous job. Yes, sir. Wait, he's going to bring you the microphone because we want to hear you.
I know Michael 15 years ago. He came with us to Arkansas to speak to an organization for the Holocaust. The nice guy. I don't trust the Poles to really. There is a segment of Poles that are intellectual, but the intellectuals were turned against the Jews just as much. Education didn't matter. So maybe I'm wrong, and I hope I am, but I think that the larger Polish population is still very anti-Semitic. But fortunately, the people who run the country are a little bit more tolerant.
So what Sidney shared was his feelings that not everybody in Poland is tolerant, and that there is still a lot of anti-Semitism in Poland. And you know what? He's right. There's still a lot of anti-Semitism everywhere. Anti-Semitism, I say this all the time on tours. It didn't start with the Holocaust, and it certainly didn't end with the Holocaust. It is the oldest hate out there. I won't be flippant like I usually am and say that it started with the New Testament, but it started very far back. And so I think what we need to understand is anti-Semitism is something that we have to continually fight. That it isn't something where we can say, oh, we're done. Oh, we won. Oh, anti-Semitism or other forms of identity-based hate. Hate is just it's a natural human inclination and condition. And so some days it feels like we come in here. I know for those of you who are docents who work with me, and it feels like we're pushing that ocean back with a broom. And some days we might even ask, we know we can't end anti-Semitism, so why are we doing it? And the reason is because a class will come in here and the kids aren't listening, and maybe they're even acting up. And at the end, they listen to Sidney, and then they're asking if they can take selfies with the survivor. And then they're asking if he'll autograph their memoir, their book. That's why we keep doing this. Because if those 30 plus kids get back on that bus, and one of them paid attention, and one of them listened, and one of them got the message, then I know that there's all these countries and people.
Talk about Dr. Minaj.
No, No, I'm not gonna talk about Dr. Monash right now. I might in a minute, but it's a little out, it's a little out of space right now, Sydney.
That, we have a policy of giving away books.
Okay. Okay. Sydney would like all of you to know that every student that comes here gets a copy of his memoir. And he does that because of a gift that we got from a very kind doctor named Dr. Monash. There we go. And those are important aspects. Being able to do those things are really important. But what we really want to do is to keep finding new ways to fight anti-Semitism, because we're never going to beat it. It's not a win. It's not a zero-sum game where somehow one day in the world there's no anti-Semitism. That's actually not going to happen. And we'd be fools if we thought otherwise. But the goal is, how are we going to keep finding ways to make this space better, to make Southern Arizona safer, to make our community safer? Thank you all so much for being here. Now, I will tell you a couple of things. The way that we're going to keep doing those things is programming. So up on this screen, you will see a couple of things that we have coming up. We have Courageous Conversations coming up on February the 25th. This is where we are going to sit down in small groups together, small tables of about 6 or 8, and we're going to talk about really difficult things. And we're going to eat and break bread together. And we're going to actually try to have dialogue, not just somebody standing up here talking to you, but you at a table with people who don't think like you, talking about how do we do this better. We have a gallery chat coming up on February 28th with Sue Newhouser. Sue is going to talk about her experience as she's set memorial stones, what they call stumbling stones, in Amsterdam? In Vienna, for her family who were lost in the Holocaust. And then we're going to have a little bit of fun. On March 8th, we have our Purim Pioneer Ball coming up. This is a fundraiser, but it's also a time to kick up your heels, put on some cowboy boots, throw on a cowboy hat, come line dance with us, and have a little bit of fun. And then finally, on March 27th, come out for our final in the Lake and Lecture Series for this season. On March 27th, we will be welcoming Nadine Epstein and Eric Ward in conversation about anti-Semitism and racism and race. So Martin would be happy to give you things on the way out to tell you all about these things. And otherwise, I can't tell you how grateful I am to all of you for joining me today. Thank you. I thought it was something you needed. Hi.
On a lighter note,
Okay, lighter notes are nice.
how was the food there? What did you eat?
You know, because I was traveling with a group of folks, we ate a lot of Kosher Delight, which is the one kosher restaurant in Warsaw and in Krakow. And I said, I never want to eat Kosher Delight again because we ended up not getting to go. I mean, our days were so packed that we didn't get to just pick restaurants and go.
In my mother's family is from Russia, and I make pork. And I had to make lactose, but I get them both. So I kind of missed those things.
Yeah, I did go the one day. That's how we ended up. We walked one day to get a plate of pierogies because we hadn't had pierogies yet.
Your pierogies are right.
But we didn't. Yeah, no, we really didn't have a chance. We didn't have any opportunities to just do relaxing touristy things. Everything we did was very intense.
You know, thinking about this thing.
Yeah, no, we didn't. On a lighter note, I wish the potato chips I came back with. We had them on the bus. So
Potato chips
yeah, paprika. They were really good.
That's chips, they like paprikash and stuff.
Yeah, yeah. My wife makes a lovely chicken paprikash.
Thank you.
All right, thanks for
great.
being here.
And you were still going back and forth to Illinois at that point.
Yeah.
So I remember that. And I remember-
They're still active and they're still
Oh, no, it's just
giving away books.
Well, I certainly hope so. I was director I wasn't director at the time that you came. I was a
You were?
volunteer, and then I was director for 12 years. I stopped in
What's your name?
2022. Elena. Elena. And
You were there when I
I was there.
you were-
I drove you around to school. Drove you, so I'm gonna give you a card, so I'm trying to help some trainers and refugees and children at the moment, but, really just such an honor to have had you speak to those students, and I wish there were a way that we could measure the impact, other than anecdotally, students coming to tell us things, but,
Those ladies have come back 20 years later.
yeah. Well, you know what? If you would be willing to share any of those with me, I would love to, write an article for our local
Emails?
Jewish newspaper, emails, anything that you get from people who've grown up that have heard you speak and how it's impacted their life. I would love to write a piece about that for our Jewish newspaper.
You were going to do that. You were going to call my daughter Ruth,
I've spoken to her, yes, okay.
and she's going to manage the thing, and I will do the rest.
Has a lot of the letters.
She'll be here in,
We get a few more of these.
how long are you staying in Tucson?
I'm gonna be in Tucson until March 9th. I'm not gonna be that long, so I'm gonna be around.
So this is a winter?
And this is the first time we've done this. And it didn't, and it didn't occur to me, and then she flashed the pictures up, and I'm like, that's Sydney, and then I looked up there. So,
They're great.
but,
They're great people over there.
I do remember talking to Ruth about buying the books 100 years ago when we bought the books. But you have my card, so if you want to email me and Ruth together and then connect us, then I'll connect with her. And I bought her book for our organization as well, so we'll do that.
Oh, you can put it in your wallet.
You have a daughter?
I do have a daughter.
That's what I thought.
I have a daughter and I had two sons, so I wonder if my sons were even born then. I can't remember what year it was. The oldest pictures on my phone are 2010, and it was before that. So, and my daughter is now 26. And she was very little when you were visiting us. She was very little.
That really makes me feel good. It just moved some things, it happened like 20 years ago, and it still goes on.
Well, I mean, and I'm listening to Lori talking about when she started in this,
Yeah.
I can't call it an industry,
And the
but in
book
this
is doing
world.
really good.
Mhm.
And the kids love the book.
It's a great book.
Yes.
It's a great book.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, I'm gonna do one more.
Okay.
Keep smiling. Now that you remember, I want one.
Yeah, Jeannie and I were together, my wife.
Yeah, I remember Jean.
Yes.
I do, and I remember contacting you
Died
after she
just
passed
like
away.
that.
Smile, honey.
You take one too.
Okay. Stand it up. So you are trying to.
He's the director of the Jewish Preservation.
No, I'm not the director of the Jewish Federation. I was the director of the Holocaust Commission, which is
Oh.
part of the Jewish Federation. My offices were with the Jewish Federation. I am a writer. I'm an editor. Writer and editor. Want to write another book? We'll work together. Ruth did a great job. I want.
Smile, kiddo.
Amazing.
Well,
When are you going back?
March 8th or 9th. Yeah, I've got about 3 weeks left. About 3 weeks left. And I'll check in with Lori if you're going to any schools, maybe I'll be able to.
Yeah, I'll be going to school. What day do I go to school?
I'll check with Lori.
Yeah.
Cause I've known
Lori
Lori.
doesn't have my schedule.
Well, she has it here, but she doesn't have, he goes separately, schools will ask him separately, outside of.
Well, you have my contact info.
Okay.
Card, so
Okay,
So, and Ruth, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah, Ruth has our schedule too.
And Ruth, and Lori can get me in touch with Ruth, I presume, right? So,
Yeah.
so we'll definitely.
It's terrific.
It's so wonderful to see you, Cindy.
Maybe.
It's so wonderful to see you.
Yes,
So wonderful that you're still,
so my wife
still sharing
died
the message.
within a few days, just real quickly. After a year, I mourned and I said, I'm not living by myself. I signed up for 3 different services and I found her.
Absolutely. And it wasn't, I don't think it was long after you were with us. It was within 4 or 5 years of when you were with us. So we could probably figure it out based on when you all.
together 10 years.
Okay. So yeah, I think it might have been, 2007 or 8. I don't know. Well, I'll look back in the archives and figure it out. It was wonderful. I remember, I think we had. Lunch on
This is a really great story.
Yes, sir.
Great story. I was at that place in Virginia. Norfolk.
Yes.
You're quite memorable. We all- Thank you. I do it, you know my business, right?
This is amazing.
And she's just coming here to play pickleball and hang out.
Don't be around Norfolk and things.
I think we have. Right on the beach, right on the ocean. That was perfect. I remember it was in the ocean. I think we took him to Virginia Beach. Well, I tell you, before I realized you were sitting in front of me. I don't
Yeah.
Still have an opportunity, it's still there, I felt so bad, I was like, what if it's God?
Okay, good. But now that I'm back.
I don't like to meet somebody where. I know.
All right, well, I would be in touch about finding out when, like, I started meeting.